Chapter podcast.
Welcome back to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, chilling with my guy, Frank Tucker, representing the Crib, South Florida. We are both representing CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, the Storm Tracker podcast, on all platforms. And also subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also subscribe to the YouTube channel, live from Canes County. Frank, it is Clemson week, which we all circled on the calendar for the Hurricanes. We all knew that this would be a big game. I think most of us thought the team would be 5-1 at this point, or maybe undefeated, 4-2. Maybe some people predicted that as well if they thought they were going to lose to Texas A&M. But you are what your record says you are. It's just like Bill Parcells used to say. And they go into this game as basically an elimination game for the ACC championship game. I think it's probably a long shot for both teams either way. But the loser of this game definitely is out of that conversation because that team would have 3 losses on the season. Clemson comes in, with 2 losses of their own, but to arguably 2 of the 3 best teams in the ACC with losses to Duke and Florida State. But this is definitely a Clemson team that is not as scary as years past. And you got a young quarterback over there in Cade Klubnik that is developing, but he's still very young, doesn't have a full season under his belt yet. But the defense is still strong, and the running game also strong, Frank. What are some of the keys for you for Miami against Clemson?
Stopping Clemson in the red zone and also stopping the run. We saw Marion Hampton for North Carolina last week, ran for 190 yards and was just kind of gashing Miami, which is super surprising because if you look at Miami's rush defense throughout this year, and they've gone against some good backs, they've been dominant. Haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher. I don't think they've allowed a team to rush for really 100 yards all season long outside of that Clemson game. So it was outside of the norm, but Hampton's proven to be one of those guys that can't put up big numbers. I think he had a 240-yard game against Appalachian State earlier this year. So he's a good player. But Miami's going against 2 really good running backs, Will Shipley and Phil Maffa, who are, combined for around 800 yards, I think 7 touchdowns this year. So they're 2 really good players for Clemson, and they're going to rely on that run game really heavy. We're not seeing the typical Clemson attack where they're relying on an elite quarterback. Cade Klubnik was a top quarterback coming out of high school, but he hasn't been putting up huge numbers. It's been more of a game manager mentality. I think he's thrown 1 interception the entire year, and it was back in like the opener. So for me, it's going to be controlling that red zone, holding them to field goals when they do get in there, and really constricting the run game, forcing Cade Klubnik to prove that he was the big-time prospect that he was coming out of high school. If Miami can do that, I feel like they can come out of this game with a pretty close victory because Clemson is still a pretty good team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think those factors are definitely key. For me, I think it's all about the turnover battle here, man. Miami has to take away more than they give away. And that hasn't been the case in the last game. And, you had a critical turnover against Georgia Tech, obviously. Miami has to find a way to generate turnovers. I mean, we really haven't seen a lot as far as turnovers this season. I mean, we did have a couple of interceptions in the Georgia Tech game, and you had a fumble recovery and a interception in the Texas A&M game, but that's kind of it, and you kind of expect more from a defense that is pretty athletic and should be able to generate turnovers. And when it comes to turnovers on the other side of the ball with Clemson, they are, I believe, plus 11 in the turnover margin. that's good for 49th in the country, but still well ahead of the Hurricanes in that regard. So I think that's really kind of the key for me. The Hurricanes are only +9 in turnover margin, just over 108th in the country, and something in that area. So yeah, for me, I think it all comes down to that. I mean, Tyler Van Dyke can't turn the ball over in this game. If he, I mean, some people say the turnover with the snap was on Matt Lee. It kind of hit him in the hands. So whoever that's on, it just can't happen. That type of mistake just can't happen in a game like this magnitude, because Clemson finds a way to score off of turnovers. That's kind of what gets them going. Once they get a turnover and score, then all of a sudden Clemson's back to being Clemson. But if you can hold them to 0 turnovers on their side and get some on yours, then I think Miami has a really good chance to win this game. The other factor, I mean, I alluded to it already, is Tyler Van Dyke. Man, he has to be efficient, and he's been pretty. I mean, despite what people may think, I mean, he's still completing 70% of his passes, and he's still, one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the entire nation. But what you kind of want to see is him push the ball downfield. We've barely seen a lot of that in these last few games where they can get maybe 40 to 50-yard type of passes. So you kind of want to see that from Tyler Van Dyke. What else do you want to see from the Miami signal caller?
I honestly, I'm okay if he came out the same way they did against North Carolina. He put up, granted, some of it was garbage time points, right? But you still put up 31 points, right? That should be enough. You can't allow 40 points to a good offense, and that's what Clemson still is. They still have a ton of talent. They had a receiver have over 150 yards last week. They got a tandem at running back, a talented quarterback. We know that they're going to have talent because they've recruited really well over the years. Is it the same Clemson team that we're typically saying? No. But this defense has to step up. I don't think it's on Tyler Van Dyke. You look at the one brief moment, which is that Georgia Tech game where he was horrible. I don't think he was horrible last week. I just don't think he was Heisman worthy. And I think we put a little bit too much expectations on Tyler Van Dyke at times, expecting him to put up these huge numbers on a consistent basis. That's not realistic. I mean, you look around the country, we have quarterbacks have lulls in moments all the time. Drake May looked horrible in the first half last week. He was atrocious. That's why it was a close game at that point. For me, I feel like you have to put your quarterback in a position to win. You can't force Tyler Van Dyke into shootouts consistently. You can't ask for 40 points on a weekly basis. This is just not a team conducive to that. Miami hasn't flipped the talent on the roster to that level yet. And turnovers are a huge part. You said it. You can't have bad snaps by Matt Lee, right? You can't have the defense not forcing turnovers consistently. You got two of the best safeties in the country on the back end. They have to be making plays, right? And I love what Cam Kinchin's actually had a pretty decent game, in my opinion. He was making some plays. He looked like he was healthy, playing confident. I just want to see more out of those guys. And if we're going to have this aggressive approach where we're blitzing corners and doing things like that, you got to get a lot of TFLs. You got to get plays in the backfield. We got to make stuff happen. And the same way that they played against Texas A&M, I'd love to see them play against Clemson, because I feel like it's going to be a similar game to that, right? You're going against two teams extremely comparable to each other, really both talented on each side. And honestly, it's going to be two quarterbacks that still have a lot to prove, but have shown glimpses of being really good, with backfields that have the potential to put up big numbers. They're very similar. Miami and Clemson are very similar teams. Record-wise, they're similar. Personnel-wise, they're similar. Coaching-wise, I think that they're similar. Dabo Swinney is not your scheme-type guy. He's more of a culture guy. Mario Cristobal, a culture guy. Honestly, I feel like this is a game that Miami, if they do win, it's going to be close, and it's going to come down to how the defense plays and not so much on Tyler Van Dyke.
Tyler Van Dyke's going to be put in situations where he has to make plays, though, man, and because this defense is I think, better than North Carolina's, and I think that's why Miami was able to score in bunches towards the end of that game. But it was really kind of garbage time, and I think North Carolina kind of took their foot off the gas to try to run the clock out to win that one. So as long as they don't make huge mistakes, which, let's be honest, Tyler Van Dyke had, so he had a good game, but those mistakes are critical. He's now has 6 interceptions on the year, and if you want to count that fumble on him, that's another turnover, which, in big games like this, those are critical. And I just kind of want to see that erased in this game, and you just kind of want to see a cleaner game from Miami. No unsportsmanlike penalties, right, from the defensive coordinator. No unsportsmanlike penalties from, what is that, a bubble? I've never seen that before.
Keep chopping up.
Yeah, you don't want to see those. I mean, that was right on cue, though. You don't want to see on any unsportsmanlike penalties from this team, or just a bunch of penalties. Regardless, you don't want to see that. And if they lose this game, you want to see that it wasn't Miami beating themselves in this one. You want Clemson to beat you. You don't want Miami beating Miami. So that's really ultimately what I would like to see from the Hurricanes. I want to see where they don't beat themselves. And I think if they don't beat themselves, they come out with a victory.
So say they win this game. Say they lose this game close, right? Say it's like a 42-38 type game. They look good. Unfortunately, they don't come out at the end with the W.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a positive, or do you think it's a negative in what's going on? Because, I mean, if you look at the history of Miami versus Clemson, even though this isn't a Clemson team that's a powerhouse right now, Miami hasn't been close. It's been butt beatings after butt beatings. Like they've been putting it to Miami for a little bit now.
Yeah.
And same way North Carolina. I mean, listen, Miami hasn't beaten North Carolina 5 seasons. This is a very, very similar matchup for Miami, where they just haven't been able to get over the hump against Clemson. So I think, honestly, people, I feel like, get into the moment a little bit, right? Before the season, we're talking about 7-8 wins, 9 being the ceiling, right? 10 being we hit the lottery, right? Mm-hmm. And we're sitting at 4-2, still on pace to win 8 or 9 games this year, in my opinion.
Could be 10.
Could be 10 if you win this game, right? And keep the train rolling. And people are kind of like, the sky is falling. It's such a weird thing for me, because at the halfway point of the season, you're 1 win away from tying what was a win total that was horrific last year. And I know we don't want the standard to be 5-7, but you have to look at progress. And I feel like Miami is progressing, despite not progressing to the point that we like. I mean, people want to pinpoint like USC and what TCU did last year. Look what TCU is this year. TCU is not some powerhouse. It was a flash in the pan maybe for a national championship run. USC is a team that still can't get over the hump, and kind of like a solid but not great Pac-10, right? Pac-12, right? It's not. I just feel like we look at Mario Cristobal from the lens like he was supposed to come in and create a national champion out of a 20-year lull right away. And I just don't feel like that's happening. I feel like Miami has made progress, especially on the recruiting trail, where the numbers are there. They're doing better. The offense looks so much better. I mean, the defense, I feel like that they got a guy who's going to be there at defense coordinator for a long period of time. I like what's going on. And even if they get a loss this week, I feel like that they're going down the right path.
Yeah, I think this fan base is a little bit too reactionary to what's going on right now. I mean, 2 losses. I mean, the first one obviously inexcusable, right? But the second one was, I think, it was a tough game on the road and to an undefeated team, now a top 10 team. So I don't think there was really anything too surprising about losing to a North Carolina. And now you have a chance to redeem yourself against Clemson. Yeah, I do think if it's a close game, to answer your question from earlier, I think it is a moral victory. But to fans, it's going to be a loss. Any loss is negative, right? But um, I still feel like this team is on the right track. I think Cristobal is still building this program. And it's going to take time. It's really going to take some time for Miami to become Miami again. I think a lot of fans kind of still are stuck in the early 2000s, and they feel like, teams like Duke, because of the name, have no business beating Miami, or the teams like North Carolina have no business beating Miami. This is not the same Duke from the early 2000s and in the 90s. This is actually a really good ACC, a really good opponents that they are playing. And yeah, I think it's going to take some time for the Hurricanes to come back. And it's not doom and gloom yet. They have 4 wins, and they could still get to a 10-win season. And that's even if they lose to Florida State. If they run the table, lose to Florida State, and win their bowl game, that's 10 wins. So I don't understand why the sky is really falling right now for the team. I think, I don't know. I feel like it's like if you had a kid, right, and they've been, mediocre for like pretty much their whole high school career as far as grades are concerned, right? And then they get to the senior year and then they start off, with straight A's, let's say, for the first semester, and then all of a sudden they failed 2 tests, and you're like, oh, he's right back to where he was. Like, let it play out for a little bit, let it play out all the way through, and let's see what this Hurricane team does. I don't think we're at a point yet where we need to panic. This is not panic mode just yet, even if they lose to Clemson. So let's talk about the MVPs of the game. Who do you think needs to show up and will show up on Saturday night?
Oh, I think that it's got to be a combination of James Williams or Cam Kinchins. You got to take advantage of Cade Klubnik and his inexperience, make some plays on the back end when they do try to throw the football, and really kind of put Clemson in a position to where they're tested, right, with the turnover battle, because nobody has been able to do that. Even in losses, they're not really turning the ball over. So I think that's those either James Williams or Cam Kinchins would be my guys who I would be choosing for MVP. And then on the other side, if Clemson were to win, I think the MVP is going to have to be one of those backs. Miami showed that they can't stop the run against an elite back last week, and Will Shipley is a guy who is earning some praise as a potential first or second round pick, and he's going to be a player that is going to have a Christian McCaffrey type effect. He's a good receiver out of the backfield. He makes people miss, really good in space. And he was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school, another one for Clemson. Yeah. And I feel like if they do win the game, he's going to be a major part of that.
Yeah, I feel like you hit it on the head with Christian McCaffrey. It's like Christian McCaffrey with more power, to me. For me, I think it's got to be the entire linebacking core, because they have to stop the run, like you said, and they have to stop Cade Klubnik from escaping the pocket. That has to stop. So if you want to throw the edges in there as well as far as contain, I would say those are the key players in this game. Francisco Mauanoa has to have a huge game here. He has to be one of those tackling machines, get those guys on the ground for Miami to have a chance. And on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, can somebody else besides Xavier Restrepo really show up here? I mean, I'm tired. I'm actually really tired of seeing him dominate the stat sheet every week. I mean, I love that.
Jacoby was good. Jacoby had a good week last week. He was
He had a
pretty
good
good last
half.
week.
Yeah, he had a
Yeah.
good half, and then he disappeared in the second half. I don't think it was his fault. I just think they just, when I say they, I'm putting the blame on Dawson and Tyler Van Dyke, but someone else has to kind of do something in this offense, or scare the defense somewhat, and whether that needs to be AJ Allen or Brashard Smith or Elijah Arroyo, someone has to kind of show up on this offense besides Xavier Restrepo. And for Clemson, easy pick for me is Kate Klubnik. It's really up to him as far as his decision making. If he makes the right decisions and if he chooses to run at the right times and make the right throws, then I think Clemson will come out with a win, because I think the running game is going to get theirs. I think Miami just has to stop the huge runs. They shouldn't be any 50-yarders. If you can contain them to 20, 25 yarders for the entire game, then I think that's a win. But as far as like players that have been missing in action for you, there's been a couple on this Hurricanes team. I call this MIA and MIA, right? For me, it's a whole position group. I just kind of talked about it. It's the tight ends. Where have the tight ends been in this offense? Frank, I understand Elijah Arroyo has been hurt. I get that. And Riley Williams is a freshman, although he's, blocking at a really high level for a freshman. Cam McCormick, I understand, not really a receiving threat, so to speak. But where's Jaleel Skinner? He was supposed to be this freak of nature that was supposed to take his game to the next level, and he is MIA. That's who's MIA for me. Who's MIA for you so far, kind of mid-season here?
So I know the grades are good. Leonard Taylor has not been Leonard Taylor for me. Has there been some flashes? Yeah, he's made some good plays. It's just, when you think of a first-round draft pick defensive tackle, really a first-round draft pick defensive player just in general, it's going to be somebody who's dominant, right? Like, we know he's got all the physical traits to be a big-time guy, but when I watched Jalen Carter play for Georgia, it seemed like he was destroying the game almost every single play, or impacting a play, right, to where it didn't work. It doesn't seem like that with Leonard Taylor. And I know the rush defense has been good for Miami overall this year, but he's got to be a guy that has to be able to handle Corey Gaynors of the world, right? Like, that's a guy who couldn't play at Miami and had to leave, and is I just don't feel like he's playing up to the standard, right? Is he playing capable football? Absolutely. But we put him in the same breath as Cam Kinchens. We put him in the same breath as a Francisco Malinoa. We put him in the same breath as James Williams and guys like that. So, and we kind of were making the argument that he's the best interior defensive lineman in the entire country. If you're the best interior defensive lineman in the country, we need more, right? Pushing for 10 sacks, maybe 8 sacks at minimum, making constant pressure in the backfield. I don't see that from him. And I think he's the biggest disappointment, because I think he's being outplayed by Ruben Bain. Because I see Ruben Bain making plays, forcing turnovers, making things happen, and he's only a freshman and doesn't have nearly the same physical traits that Leonard Taylor does. So for me, I want to see more from him. The other guy is another South Florida guy, and I love him, is Wesley Bassane, right? KJ Coyd was a backup for Louisville, and Louisville wasn't some powerhouse defense last year. And he kind of came to Miami, and he's kind of walked in and took Wesley Bassane's trap in a way, right? It's been a sort of, where's Wesley been? And listen, I think that he's another player where he does some good things, and he's still a rotational piece in this defense that's not a liability. But you came to Miami as a 4-star linebacker from Miami Central. We got to see that, right? You're a 4.5 40 linebacker. We've seen you make huge plays on the high school level. We've seen you make huge plays on Saturdays and Saturday nights in primetime matchups. Huge hits, right? Setting the tone as an enforcer for this defense. I haven't seen that this year from him. So those two guys, as hard as it is to say, as a biased South Florida guy, those are two guys that I feel like if the defense got more out of them, we'd probably be in a better position over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, to be honest, I think Corey Flagg has probably played better than Wesley Saint. I mean, Corey Flagg is a veteran, and he knows, that's Blues guy. But you got to give it to him as far as him being in the right spot. Now, athletically, he's not what Wesley Saint is. Let's just be honest about it. But Corey Flagg to me has outplayed Wesley Saint at the linebacker position.
That is horrible to say. I'm sorry. I think he's a good player. Listen, I think he's had a decent career here at Miami, but there's no way that should be the conversation. We were talking about Corey Flagg hopefully not seeing the field at some point this year, despite us knowing it was going to happen just because the coach he is a guy that's going to do everything right. But I wanted to see Wesley Saint just step up and take that role as that will backer, that weak side backer opposite Francisco Mauanoa, and it just hasn't happened. So I feel like that's one of the most disappointing storylines of the year for me.
All right, we'll see what happens Saturday night at Hard Rock Stadium, 8 p.m. kick. I believe it's on ACC Network. Let me double check that. But I do want to it is on ACC Network. I do want to transition to recruiting here because we've got big-time recruit in LJ McCray. Going to make his decision on Saturday as well. And Jason Taylor went up to Daytona to visit McCray, and he's a guy that has basically Georgia, Florida State, and Miami as his, top schools. I don't think Auburn's really in this race at all. So it's really kind of down to, those three, the big three of Florida and Georgia. How do you think this turns out, Frank? Does Miami add another 4-star to its class this week?
I don't think so. From everything I'm hearing, it's probably Florida State right now. I think he wanted to give Miami a chance. I just don't think maybe enough was done. And it's unfortunate to say, but at the same time, this is a really solid defensive line class. You got the two blue chip bookends, and then you got Artavius Jones, who I feel like he's going to make a rise into the top 5 defensive tackles in the country by the end of the year. He's just a freak athlete. And then you got Dylan Russell, who's one of the best South Florida defenders in that 2024 class. So they're okay. It just, you would love to see an LJ McCray, a move type player. Can play inside. He can play out, more of like a 4-eye type player, who's an NFL size, NFL athleticism. He's the type of prospect that you want when you're trying to flip a roster that's kind of devoid of elite talent, especially in the trenches. So right now, everything I'm hearing is Tallahassee is going to end up, being the spot for him. I think Auburn was trying to get in real heavy. Don't think that they're in it. I don't think Georgia is going to get him. And Florida seemed to fall down just almost daily for that kid. So it's going to be a tough one, but we continuously see these Florida State-Miami battles, and Miami has honestly come out on top more often than not in this 2024 class. This is going to be one of the very few that they lose, in my opinion. And a sign of why that could be happening, and I'm not necessarily saying this is anything I'm hearing, I'm just kind of making an interpretation of the situation. You offer Leroy Jackson, who's a 6'2", 275-pound defensive tackle out of Georgia. Right before the commitment of LJ McCray, right? It seems like weird timing. Yeah, but LJ McCray is more of an interior defensive lineman too, not so much your typical defensive end. I think that Leroy Jackson is probably going to be one of those guys that you can use as a 3 technique or some 4-eye type stuff because he's not a massive player. 6'2", 275 pounds right now. More of a penetrator. I think he got 9 quarterback hits last year. He's having a good high school career. He was MVP of a junior all-star game in the Georgia area. He is being recruited by teams like Georgia Tech and North Carolina and Iowa State, but more mid-tier Power 5s rather than what we're seeing for LJ McCray, which is Georgia, Florida State, Florida, Miami, right? It's a little
Right.
bit of different caliber player, but for me, it's a sign that Miami's still looking for defensive linemen. And when you already have 4 defensive linemen in the class with the potential to add Armando Blunt to that 2024 class, that means that you're probably going to be missing out on LJ McCray, or you're trying to hedge your bets on not landing him. So we'll see what happens. But if I had to make a bet, it would be not Miami for this one.
That's unfortunate to hear for Hurricanes fans, but Miami's still in line for another defensive lineman out of Florida in Booker Pickett. What do you think of the chances of Miami can land him instead of Gray?
I think that they have a good chance. It's just I don't know if Booker Pickett knows where he wants to go just yet. I do think Ohio State is a school that intrigues him heavily. Florida State is another school that he loves. And I do think that the legacy aspect of the University of Miami, plus the interest from his cousin, DJ Pickett, in Miami, does make things a little interesting. I know that Jason Taylor and him have started to build a relationship a little bit. We did talk to him, I think, about a month ago, and that was the case. Talked to him a little bit more recently, and he did let me know that he was going to be holding off on a commitment for a little bit, wanted to get some visits in before he did make that ultimate decision. So I would probably target more end of October, November timeframe, maybe even as close to early signing day as him making a decision. But I just don't feel like he's there yet. I do think that Miami has a good chance. They are recruiting him. I just don't know if they were recruiting him to the same level as LJ McCray. Could that change if they don't land McCray? Maybe, but they do play 2 different positions. Pickett's more of that jack defensive end type role, that jack linebacker type role, where he's an undersized defensive end who plays more of a pass rush type role, especially on third downs. And he's not what LJ McCray is with his versatility. So I do think Miami's still in the race there. I just wouldn't say that Miami's a favorite or out of it just yet.
All right, we'll continue to monitor that situation on CanesCounty.com. A story that we have up on CanesCounty.com is players that could possibly flip to Miami. Now, in that article, we have LJ McCray, and this is from our national guys. LJ McCoy's listed on there. Cedric Bailey is listed on there, as well as Amir Jackson, who is a 4-star tight end committed to Florida. Do you think any of those guys have a chance to flip to Miami, or any other players that we should kind of keep an ear out for, I guess you could say, as far as flipping to the Canes?
Oh, I think that if Miami wanted to with LJ McCray, it could probably happen. Just got to see more of a relationship develop between those two parties. Cedric Bailey, very much in the same situation. I think that Purple Machine influence with both of those guys is there, and I would love to see Miami try to flip a Cedric Bailey. You hear guys like Zaquan Patterson calling for Miami to recruit his teammate. And Jeremiah Smith has an extremely close relationship with the North Carolina State commit. Listen, if Miami really wants Jeremiah Smith, the pathway is you recruit Cedric Bailey. Now they're going to have to push the issue heavy because you did spurn him pretty heavily throughout the process. That's why he's committed to NC State right now and not the University of Miami. But
Right.
I do think that those are 2 guys that have a chance to flip. Amir Jackson is an interesting situation because I do think Miami would like to add a more prototypical tight end. I think that Elijah Lofton is more of an H-back type player that they can even use as a running back. You see him used in that role in high school a little bit, more power back type situation. I think he's like a Swiss Army knife type player, especially sawed off at like 6'1", 6'2", 230 pounds. Not your typical 6'5", 6'6" freak athlete tight end running up the seam. Now, he does have the ability to make plays in the passing game as well, but Amir Jackson fits that mold. He is what Jaleel Skinner turned out not to be. So, and I think that Miami does like him. He built a good relationship with Coach Cody Woodell. And he does have interest in Miami, from when we've talked to him. Now, what happens with that Florida staff? Do they continue to have to struggle this year? Depending on how that season finishes, what happens to Billy Napier? Does he get fired? Do things open up with Florida? If that happens, I could foresee a flip. if that staff stays intact, I don't think that Amir Jackson ends up flipping to Miami. He is a Georgia kid, so he's a little bit closer to Gainesville, which makes them a little bit more a hometown feel comparative to Miami. But I think Miami's probably keeping tabs. Just don't necessarily know if they're pushing to the level that Florida is right now. So we'll see.
All right, man. I don't know. I don't know about this class. It feels like, I don't want to jinx it or anything, but it feels like this class is pretty much kind of going to stay as is. It seems like there's not going to be a ton of movement with this class, additions or subtractions. What say you?
I think that you could see some potential with the way NIL works right now. You could see reclasses. If you add an Armando Blunt, you probably jump into the top 10 nationally for this 2024 class. Wouldn't be surprised to see them tap in with a CJ Bailey, like we just spoke about, or a LJ McCray. And the big thing is a flip of David Stone. Like, that's what they're going to continue to work for.
Yeah.
And that's going to come down to the wire. We heard his comments when he did commit. Am I forecasting a flip? Probably not right now, because Oklahoma is playing really good football. They are on a better forecast than Miami if you do look at what they've done as of late. And overall, he is an Oklahoma kid. So we'll see what happens there. I do think that there's a chance that he does flip, though. And Miami's going to keep working on a lot of the top players nationally. I don't think that they're going to quit with Aiden Breland, right? I just don't foresee them getting a flip there. I know that they want elite talent on the interior of that defensive line. That's why they're offering guys still, even with guys still on the board, right? That's why it's happening. You don't want to rely on the transfer portal on filling out your depth. That's not really what you want to do. You want to bring in impact transfers. And I think that even if you end up with an Armando Blunt and even if you end up with a David Stone, we're going to see a heavy influx of talent from the transfer portal this offseason. So I don't think Miami's stressing too much, adding 5 or 6 more guys in this 2024 class. And I don't really think you're going to see much attrition in that 2024 class either. Don't see many guys flipping or falling off. I know there's been some rumors about Chance Robinson in Ohio State. Don't see that becoming an issue. I don't see Josiah Trader in Florida State becoming an issue. I know that, Zaquan Patterson was at a game at Auburn. Don't foresee that becoming an issue. Overall, I like where Miami's at in this class. I think they stick it out, and I do think that they end up, borderline top 10 by when things finish off.
One last question about recruiting. I know we're going a little over time here, but Georgia, right? They added another DB to their class with Andre Evans. So you got Andre Evans, you got DeMello Jones, and you got Ellis Robinson. Ellis Robinson is a player that Miami was very interested in. Any chance he flips to Miami because they've added another DB to their class?
Gotta see. I mean, with this age of NIL, there's always a chance, but he's pretty much shown that he's locked into Georgia. He's been a guy that over the course of the official visits was recruiting for Georgia. He was there on their biggest official visit weekend. And overall, he hasn't. I just don't know I think after the exit of DeMarcus Van Dyke, there was a little bit of a lull in his recruitment. And unfortunately, that hurt Miami because they were still fighting an uphill battle going against the back-to-back national champions. And they're still a team that is undefeated. It's not like Georgia's taking a step off the gas.
Right.
And so we'll see. I think that the IMG relationship definitely helps. Miami's done a good job in that program as of late, especially with Mario Cristobal. The problem is, can you prove to Ellis Robinson that you're an elite program?
Yeah.
And last week, the defensive backs didn't look great. I mean, Tez Walker destroyed the corners, right? So I think that there's some proving points in some signature games going forward with this week against Clemson, Florida State, and Louisville, to where you can show that going against solid receiving corps that your corners can step up and be developed and have solid games. Because if you can't prove that you can develop, I don't think that Tyreek Stevenson getting drafted second round is necessarily a total check, on the box of development, right? And DJ Ivey was horrible in college. And so him being a 7th-round pick also doesn't show that you're developing defensive backs at a high level. So I do think that there's more to be shown. I think that Miami's going to have to come out of pocket big in NIL. So we'll see if that they're willing to do that. And they also have to show that they can win down the stretch. You get a win against Clemson. We know how this recruiting thing goes. Social media is going to go crazy, right? The kids are going to go crazy. We know that when they beat Texas A&M, there were a number of kids that tried to commit to the University of Miami, where Miami turned them away.
Yeah.
Now, majority of those in 2025, absolutely, but still, you know how that momentum goes with the University of Miami because it's still a major brand in college football.
Yeah.
So you get a major win against Clemson. Maybe you get a win against Florida State. If they win against Florida State, they might be able to get whoever they want. So we'll see what happens. I just don't want to forecast a flip for an Ellis Robinson when Miami is nowhere close to being a proven product for a guy who's going to arguably the best program in the country right now.
Yeah, arguably the best country in the last 10 years as well. But we'll see. Stranger things have happened. Let's talk a little high school football before we get out of here. So this week we've got Columbus, who, like we mentioned earlier, Dalen Russell committed to the Hurricanes, will be playing Miami Norland, who is absolutely hot. I said after that first game, when I saw Norland in a kickoff classic game against Ely, I was like, this team is going to states. I said it right then, and they kind of proven me right here with their win against Miami Central last week. Miami Central now with 3 losses on the year. I don't think anybody would probably predict that, although they played a pretty tough schedule. So Norland against Columbus, man. This should be a good matchup. Columbus,
yeah, it should be.
Last week. What did Columbus lose last week or the week before? I think they lost the week before against Homestead.
Yeah.
So who you got in this game?
I got Norland. I think Norland's second best team in South Florida right now after knocking off Central. That was the big test for them, right? Because you put 50-something points on Lakeland. You beat Booker T. Came back to win that game. Yes, some dominant performances outside of that. Enyo Yapor has now passed over 10,000 yards and 100 career touchdowns, which is ridiculous. And then that defense is playing out of their mind. I think they've knocked 3 quarterbacks out of games this season, which is a ridiculous amount of games that they've knocked out a quarterback. So I'm going to take Norland in this one. I think it's going to be close just because that coaching staff of Columbus does an excellent job. And overall, it's a very good roster still for Columbus, especially in the trenches. But we'll see. I mean, in South Florida, we never know what happens, especially in 2023, where it has been close game after close game. It's been upsets, right? It's just what football is this season. So I feel like that on all levels. Even left the NFL, the Detroit Lions are 5-1. Who would have thought that, right? So overall, I think it's going to be a solid week. Southridge, who's a solid team in that 3M classification. They play Miami Central, so that should be it shouldn't be a terrible game. You got Western versus Miramar, 2 teams that do have some talent on the field. Kobe Howard is coming off a 200-yard performance for Western last week, so there's going to be some talent on the field there. Shamar Miko, who's the defensive end, who's committed to Indiana, who's I think one of the best pass rushers in the region. So there's some good matchups. But we're all looking toward the playoffs where it's a battle in that 2M classification with Miami Central, Miami Norland, Miami Northwestern, Edison, Booker T, and American Heritage for who's going to make the state, right? And then you look at 4M, which is Western, Columbus, Palmetto. Palmetto, had a tough game against Columbus where it was 15-0. But they we know how South Florida is. There's always that redemption game in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens, and it's getting down to the nitty gritty, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm assuming you got Chaminade 1, Norland 2, 3. I would say we got Columbus, St. Thomas.
No, I'm putting St. Thomas, and then you got Heritage after that, and then I got Central at 5.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think Central Homestead fighting for that last spot in the top 5.
All right, should be a fun playoffs. I expect South Florida to come home with at least 4 rings this year, but we'll see how it all shakes out. Anything else you want to cover in this episode of the Storm Tracker podcast?
If you're in Broward County and you don't want to go to Dade County for a football game this weekend, go see St. Thomas versus Monarch. There is a number of Miami targets in that game, as well as commits on the St. Thomas side. Samari Reed is a 2025 athlete that Miami's recruiting. Jabari Brady, one of the best receivers in the country. Monarch has a 2026 quarterback, 2027 quarterback, my apologies, that is going to be a guy that it becomes a Division I prospect. There's a number of really good players in the field, and I think that this is going to be a game that's actually pretty decent. So if you're in Broward and you're looking for a game to go to on Friday night, head to that one.
Is that at Monarch or
It is. It's at Monarch. It's at Monarch. So
all right.
But Monarch doesn't have a home field, so we'll get the information out there to you. How about that?
All right. They'll probably play at maybe Dry Pink Stadium. So
something like that, probably.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Great stuff from you as always. Make sure you subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for more information on Miami Hurricanes athletics. Basketball seasons is just around the corner, so plenty of information and news and opinion pieces from myself when it comes to the basketball programs, and of course more Hurricanes football coverage. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel as well, live from Canes County. Until the next episode of the Storm Tracker podcast.